first keynote of this morning is about the value and use of a trust framework for business-to-business data sharing. It's with Gerard van der Hoeven, I believe, from the iSHARE Foundation. I do believe that he's listening. Gerard van der Hoeven.
That's me.
Yes,
That's
it is you. Thank you.
I didn't even hear that. It was sort of expected, of course, but thank you very much, and good to be here. Nice to see so many new faces. So look forward to get to know all of you a bit better during today. So I'm from the Netherlands. I just got here, flying in from Amsterdam. So it's cool to be in Madeira, and I'll share what we're doing with iSHARE and the iSHARE Foundation. Also in close collaboration with FiWARE, so we'll be pointing that out in a bit. But the key thing that I wanted to talk with you about today is the role of trust in data sharing, in data spaces, and especially trust between businesses. And trust is, of course, super important in everything. So this is where I started this morning, trusting my car. Actually, super accurate. I recorded it this morning without touching my steering, without touching my car at all, just recording what the car is doing, taking me to the airport. Me trusting my entire life with Tesla, actually. So how does that work? Because, well, clearly I trusted that machine, I trusted that car to bring me safely on the location, actually stopping for traffic light, what you see it's doing, taking the corners, taking exits, and it's actually happening. This specific part is restarting. Right, I think I take over at some point. But usually, of course, we learn from others, and we learn from others what can be trusted, and we learn ourselves what can be trusted, and to what extent technology can be actually trusted. Usually, we're not doing that independently, totally on our own, but we try to build on the shoulders of others. But with the whole data sharing process in a lot of businesses, we're sort of trying all over again and starting all over again. Setting up new contracts, super worried about what's happening with our data. We've seen everything happening with Cambridge Analytica and all the other examples where your data is actually utilized for something totally different than your own purposes. So that is, of course, the reason to really secure data and be worried about that. But is that scalable? Is that really the way to go for the long run? Because what you end up with in the whole business-to-business data sharing process is a lot of contracts, which is maybe not ideal and maybe funding a lot of lawyers that would definitely love that. But as a business, you want to be able to be versatile, be working with other businesses in the same segment, in the same industry, in a super fluent way. So not having all those clauses, figure everything out all the time again. So wouldn't it be great if you can connect to something else, can connect to something like a trust anchor that is giving you the certainty that you can actually work with parties, that stuff is covered, that there's a legal coverage, that there's a technical coverage of that trust. And with that trust part, actually control who accesses your data, what they are going to do and can be doing with your data and your information, and really be in full control, digitally verifiable, and grip of what's happening and traceability of how that data is actually used. So that's where iSHARE started. We started back in 2015 as a sort of a research phase project in logistics. So good to be here, and also heard some other research and the other projects in logistics were also happening. And the starting point was, hey, we're going to share data, which is all super cool, and we're going to put it on a central platform. So basically all logistics companies said that is amazing, but not with my data. Because how can I know what's happening with that information? So that triggered the development of iSHARE as a trust framework, where data is not stored centrally, it stays at the location, but that data is controlled by you as an organization. So that is where the iSHARE Trust Framework was born and started originally, with a few key principles. So iSHARE Framework does not define anything of your data. So we're not defining what kind of data is shared. You just build on the trust framework and you agree with parties what kind of data is actually used. There's nothing centralized. So iSHARE Framework is fully distributed. It's federated. If that makes any sense to you guys, you know what federated is? Not a lot? Only one. Okay? So maybe it's good to, so the principle of federation is roughly the same thing as the government. The government also is partially federated. There is some form of control in terms of trust, and these are the guidelines, and this is how we work. But the actual operation is done locally by, in iSHARE's case, by data spaces. Data spaces can have full freedom of how to design and use iSHARE components and the iSHARE framework in onboarding their participants. Along the same lines of trust, because that will be used across the data spaces. And a key principle is that iSHARE is non-profit. So it's not a commercial offering. We really serve all the data spaces that work with iSHARE and build that. And with that, we really bring trust. We bring pure data sovereignty. That's also one of those hype terms, but do you guys have a picture what data sovereignty is? No. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 1. So let's make that simple. Because sovereignty is nothing else than full control and control of what's happening with your data. Just as a country is sovereign as long as it has full self-decision power on what's happening with the country. Now, look at Russia and Ukraine. They're trying to harm the sovereignty of Ukraine, clearly. That same happens with data. Your data is usually stored already at service providers. You use cloud applications, you use a lot of applications already. What's happening with that data? If you look at the European Data Governance Act, that is about data sovereignty for businesses. That is what we basically allow you as a business to control what's happening with your data that is already in existing applications. And we've been building the trust framework for quite a period. We've been live since 2018. Currently have data sets of 1.5 million businesses already opened up and basically shareable within the iSHARE network. And I'll jump into a bit more details how that works, because there's nothing in terms of data in the network, of course. We only enable parties to share data. Data stays at the source. Key thing is that it's nowadays trusted by governments. So the Dutch government in 2 areas went all the way to start using iSHARE as a way to request access to data of businesses. That same logic can of course be applied everywhere. Growing pretty quickly. I think the numbers make you guys can read, so it's clear where we're headed. Expect to be at close to 200,000 organizations registered in the iSHARE network in the coming year, especially for one of the most scaling use cases, and I'll show that in a bit. So good to share what is it really? What's iSHARE and what are the core elements, and try to make that simple. So the cornerstone foundation is non-technical. It's the legal baseline. It's the terms of use of data, because that is for every business the stack of contracts that we just saw. But then going in a different way. You don't need a bilateral agreement with an organization to share information. You have a generic umbrella where every data transaction is falling under that same umbrella in the terms of use. And with that terms of use, you cover, hey, I share my data with you, and I'll provide you with a license, and that license is a contractual agreement. But that license is dynamic. So you can give data to a government, stating you can use it, but you can't resell it. Or you can use it, and you can create generic reports out of that. well, and much more, and it's a dynamic process, so those licenses will be scaling. So if you check out the iShare site, those licenses are defined, and it's pretty well a key item in how you work with data access. With that, well, building the cornerstone of everything basically, because all those organizations are onboarded on that same terms of use, but without limiting data spaces to go specific, because for a specific data space, a specific applications, you can have additional terms, which is all fine. You can also register and create specific terms of use in the iShare network. Then the next component, it's based on the distributed ledger. So every data space has his own ledger, his own node where he can onboard your own participants, which is done on the same level of assurance, so the same trust level is set up. That's that federated structure that I just mentioned is set up in the same way for all those satellites. So basically satellites are organizations that are certified to onboard new organizations. And of course that is not a manual process, because there's just APIs with documentation to do digitally onboarding of especially data owners. And that's what we're doing in a few of the cases now, where data owners are onboarded just by using eIDAS with the right trust level, log in with eIDAS and with that register your organization, agree with the terms of use, and with that be available for data sharing in the entire network. And with that ledger, well, there's digitally verifiability of your contracts, your credibility, your certificates, all the elements that are required for the whole data sharing structure. So that's the participant register, and where there's also a bit of discovery, because in that ledger we can also find, and you share as an organization, where your data offering is, so where your services are that you provide. Because we bumped into that issue, that new cases started, hey, I want to share where my data actually is, and now I have to share that bilaterally. Now you have a pointer in the network where to start searching for the data of that organization. And secondly, it's the pointer to where authorizations are stored. So maybe you now completely lost it, what that construct is and how authorizations and data and how that worked. Anyone's lost here? More or less. Thanks for being honest. So that's why there's sort of a demo flow in a minute to take you through and show you how it's really working. Last part, and definitely not the least, is building on top of all of that, is an authorization registry structure. Basically, an authorization registry is nothing else than a register where you store what company, what organization can access what data point wherever it is stored. And that sounds like an old-fashioned notary kind of structure, but of course that's not the case. It's fully dynamic, looking at the logistics. Think about, hey, I generate an eCMR. I don't know whether you share something about eCMR. Anyone knows what eCMR is? No, okay. So you have a bill of lading when you send goods. That bill of lading is going to be digitized. And in that bill of lading you have, this transporter is going to do this part and this transporter is going to do that part. So with that digital format you generate authorizations to data wherever it is. So that's the logic of generating authorizations and not have your vulnerable data open to everyone. It's really shared with those you really work with. So, and with that, we're working in Dutch logistics where we originally started. But the great thing is that that ledger is cross-cutting. So it's not specific to a sector. There's nothing specific to a sector. And that's where we're now building in the Belgian logistics, in the building sector, in housing sector, in the energy sector, cross-cutting all those sectors, because those organizations are the same. Every organization, whatever business, they all work in logistics as a part, because you get stuff in and you're sending stuff out, but you're also in the energy data space in a sense, because you buy energy and you produce energy with solar panels, well, and so forth. So the concept is that with that registration you must be able to contribute and work in different data spaces, but with a central trust anchor. And that's why we set this ledger up in this structure. So, well, you had a presentation from Colmy earlier. We saw that it's a challenge for a lot of organizations to get your head around, okay, how to actually apply this. So that's why we, together with FiWARE, started i4Trust. And i4Trust has basically a data space acceleration program with funding for those projects that want to think data space, want to set it up, and not talk about it, just do it. And that's what, bless you. That's what we're, well, in the Netherlands we're trying to be direct, as I just heard, which is usually the case indeed, but we're really trying to be pragmatic as well. Test it and learn from that and develop on. And that's what we're doing with the i4Trust program. I have a few slides on, I thought I had that. I thought I had the terms, but you've learned a lot about i4Trust already, but I'll get back to i4Trust in a bit. But the thinking was, let's create a program not only consisting of the trust components, but also of the actual building blocks to build that data space and build the other aspects of a data space. So I won't take you through the entire model, but the thinking is, and I'll share the slides later on, that you have different building blocks that create a data space, which is basically a set of agreements. We're going to work with this data standard, we're going to use this trust framework, this is how we're going to govern this data exchange, these are the services that we're actually going to use. But instead of starting all over again and starting from scratch, there's so much available there already. So, of course, well, I shared what we do with iSHARE and where we are in terms of specifying the level of trust in identities, that trusted exchange, and that authorization registry, that access and usage control that I showed, and a part of that discovery and the governance. But if you bring FiWARE in, there's a lot of open source components already that complete that package. And that's why it's such a strong combination, and we're really driving data spaces with a real set. So FiWARE team implemented iSHARE interfaces and specifications in some of the components. We now brought that together and have a ready package to actually get started in reality, which to my mind is extremely useful and valuable for a lot of organizations. So also being cautious of time, let's move forward a bit on what it actually is, that whole data sharing and how that works, and I'm trying to take you through a few examples. So there are a few core roles, and EIDAS just jumped out of my scheme apparently. A few core roles. So of course there's the data consumer, an organization, a legal entity that needs to have access to information and needs to have information to provide a service or to do something smarter for a data owner. That data is usually stored at an application that is out there already, like in logistics support community system or your energy provider, or well, you name it, there are a lot of applications out there already. But the data is from a data owner because it's his building, he owns that building, he owns the solar panels, he owns the truck, or he owns the goods. So he should be in control of that information. And to be able to let data consumer and data provider work together, there are a few aspects required. Well, first of all, that trust anchor, where to keep track of what roles parties have and if they can actually work together. But that need to be filled with identities with organizations that you can trust, based on EIDAS, the EIDAS framework, which is the European standard for business identities, which is now being rolled out in version 2. And maybe good to jump into that later on, but let's stick to that is a trusted framework. But we're not limited to that. So iSHARE standard specifies this is the level of trust we require, and basically EIDAS completely complies with that, and we connected the two frameworks. But for the US, there's no EIDAS. So for the US, we will have other identifiers, same for Asia. And we're not linked or locked into that. We're open for global use of identities. And then last but not least, that authorization registry, which is not a centralized role, it's just a service provider. There can be any service provider or well, you could actually do it yourself with all the open source components that are available, both from iSHARE, but also in iForTrust, and basically the FiWARE marketplace is generating that authorizations. So now we have a federated structure where we have agreements on how to communicate. That data standard is defined. But what are we going to do with that? So there I thought, let's take a few examples. Something changed with my animations, but one example is climate agreement reporting. So all countries in Europe and much more signed for the climate agreement with the objective to, of course, bring CO2 emissions down. But all businesses and all governments are working on measures to actually make that go down. In the Dutch structure, the Ministry of Economic Affairs is responsible for that. But instead of asking all businesses to report with a written report in Excel uploaded somewhere and have an entire team processing all that data, they flipped it around. They thought, why not get authorization on the energy consumption of that business directly from the energy supplier? Then all those business owners just give us authorization to that existing data set without all the hassle and all the reporting that you should do afterwards. Well, same sort of line of thinking is happening in logistics, where that data is already somewhere, for instance in terminals, in ports, in transportation locations. That data is already there. So instead of downloading it and sending it to your client, why not authorize your client to retrieve that data directly? Same goes with the whole food value chain that we've been seeing in iForTrust as well, to have visibility of a longer value chain of what's happening with food. So I wanted to take you through in a few steps what that climate agreement structure looks like and how it really works, and then getting a bit to conclusions. So it's the same principle, using existing components. That's what they did, nothing else. So it could actually be an iForTrust example. So using iSHARE components, a standard data specification, and not too complicated, super small. It's basically 5 or 6 fields, and that's it. A simple data service that you can use everywhere. And then what is the structure? It's pretty straightforward. The data consumer, which is the Dutch government, checks in the network if that data owner is already registered. If that's not the case, he gets a message, do you want to register? As soon as he's registered, within the satellite, the pointers are available to the dataset. The dataset is a service provider that is already available within the network. The government checks with that service provider, I want to have the dataset of that specific data owner. Can you give me that? But the first step, of course, then is, hey, is that organization actually trusted? The one that is asking, oh, check, the government is actually trusted. That's a good thing. Is that data owner actually in the network? Oh, they're also in the network, that's also good. Okay, so where are the authorizations of that specific data owner? Because it's his decisions where to store those authorizations. With that information, which is just a pointer, the check will be done. The government wants to access your data set at this energy provider. With these terms, do you want to give him the authorization to actually do that? If there's no authorization yet, that is the moment that there's a message out to the data owner. It's just an email today. Hey, government wants to access your data. Do you want to give them authorization to access your existing data set? With that, okay, authorization is set. Data owner is in control. He can change and withdraw that authorization at any given moment. But there's full trust because it's legally covered. It's technically assured. The key exchange is actually done. I don't know how many techies are on board. Technical. Yeah, then don't jump into the full tech details, but we can do that at another moment. But the key exchange is organized, and with that you have legal security, technical security, and absolute certainty and full control of what's happening with your data. And that's what we're doing with the iSHARE framework, and we couldn't do that, of course, if there's no other components. We're just a portion in that. So what are the key success factors of getting to a successful project? Also trying to trigger you in terms of what's happening with i4Trust. How do I find a good project? So what I've been doing with the existing projects is start with existing data sets. There's so much data out there already, and there's a lot of confidential business data stored but not used. There's so much, well, I always call it data waste, and that's what we're trying to solve. If you start with that, with a launching data customer, there's just a great opportunity to already start with that. Start simple. That's the other lesson. Well, we've been discussing on our way here. There's so many examples where use cases start crazily complicated and never get off the ground. In that energy case, it's just a simple API that is providing the same data set, and that same API with like 5-6 fields is implemented by a few players, and with that you have a federated structure. Well, built on the iSHARE framework, of course. I'm of course obliged to say that, but I've seen a lot of cases where projects started from great ideas and a lot of engineering and great structures and a lot of programming, and then there's an interlock because no organization wants to share their data actually. They wanted to learn from the project but never share their data in reality. And that's where starting from that trust element and build on top of that is just helping to get your project really off the ground and not get stuck in engineering. And don't reinvent the wheel. Utilize what's there in i4Trust. We brought everything together for you guys to use, and there's even funding for that. So with that, jump into i4Trust. With the program, we're trying to take you by the hand, help you, and you've shared this already. So there's a mentoring program, there's support on all the aspects of setting up data spaces and building those applications, and there's funding. You see the numbers. So that is really helping to get scaling. I'm moving fast on this because it's already shared. So it's specifically targeted at SMEs according to the European specification. So please check that if you are interested. And it's roughly those numbers. I'll share the slides later on. And the process is pretty straightforward. Check i4trust.org and off you go. And if you can't figure it out, just reach out to me or any of the team. So that's what I wanted to share on trust and structures and how to do all of that. Everything on iShare is just online. It's open source, and we're there to support and help you. And I think the key message here is let's drive this. Sorry, I'll go back. Let's drive this development together. I think in Europe, well, guys know Gaia X? Nobody? Few? No, there's initiatives like Gaia X, there's initiatives like IPSAE. There's a lot of initiatives going on there. There's a lot of funding also from the European Commission side to drive this whole data spaces thinking. Because, and that's sort of also the cornerstone, there's been too many platform players overplaying their hands and taking a much too dominant role in sectors. That's why the Commission is driving all this development to enable organizations to work together in a simpler way and not get only massive standards like GSM, which is not, but also smaller standards. So as mini standards, how to request an ETA of a piece of luggage, or how to request an energy data set. And that's the development we're on. And well, the call to all of you is let's collaborate and use what is there already and drive new business opportunities. Because in my mind, if you look at the data that's available already now in that energy case and some of the other cases that we've been doing, you can run AI applications on top of that data set and provide added value to so many organizations without having that whole legal barrier, that technical barrier, because the data set is available. The only thing the AI should do is request that data set and give clear value back to the data owners. So it's driving a lot of new opportunities for new line of thinking of entrepreneurs. So with that, I wanted to close, and I don't think I usually get that at the end of a presentation, what's your role at iShare? So I don't know whether you said that? Did you say that? No, so I'm the executive director of the entire foundation. So that's you saw my colleague Rajiv, and with Rajiv and the entire team, we're really trying to drive federated thinking and data sharing in a trusted way. So look forward to collaborate, and open for questions. And I think I lost track of time a bit, but no, it's 32. Still have another talent in that.
I have a question regarding, I don't know if I have to use.
Yeah, go ahead. It's
yeah. Keep like this. So regarding, because data, especially in private markets, are connected to revenues and competition. So, and sometimes, because as I understood, so your foundation defined this trust umbrella and this legal framework and support to give credibility and to assurance that your data are well used. But sometimes small companies are not aware, completely aware of the consequences of share some data instead of in others, and especially look at the competitors, because I will share what the other will share. So it's like the prisoner games, no? Here, I believe in data share. So I will do what the other will do. So I will not be the first to share this data. So how you manage this? This is my first question. And the other question, because what you are doing seems really a public service. So I don't understand really, because you fill this gap. Because what you do seems like a public body should do this, no? To give trust, because I trust public body. I don't trust foundation, but I trust you, but...
Thanks a lot. Good starting point.
Sorry.
For questions today, but
2 questions, but very good presentation, and thank you very much, because you opened my mind to something that was completely unknown. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Let's take the 2 questions. First of all, that prisoner aspect, so how to start with it. It's a totally valid point. But the key line of thinking and the actual realization is that data access is actually under your control. So with that, it's not going to any of your competitors. Of course, we started in logistics, which is hyper competitive. And one of the worries was, so if I use this framework, can everybody see who I work with? No, you can't, and no, it's not registered, because it's not visible to any of the nodes. There's no new central platform. So that is a design criterion if you look at the documentation, that is a key thing that is solved. But then still the question is how to start with the first data offering, because if you have the first data offering, it's a network effect. So, well, I've been an entrepreneur almost all my life, and building software companies and thinking about network effects. So that's been my key issue and worry on how do I scale this to a larger level. So there's no need to put that on the screen. So the key thing is start with a massive data consumer like the government that wants to have a data set, and there's a clear but simple operational efficiency effect for all those organizations. There's 1.5 million organizations where the data set is available. They have a choice. Am I going to download my energy consumption every week from my energy provider, log in, have someone do that, create a CSV in the format of the government? Or do I give them access to my data set, knowing that they have only the ability to do that, to use it, as long as it's private? Then it's covered. And all the other cases, so we have the Central Bureau of Statistics in the Netherlands, where basically the same case goes. I don't know how many of you get letters from statistical bureaus. It drives me crazy, because in my mind, that data is available. I want to share it with you, just check it out yourself. My bookkeeping, come on, why should I be? So I have my staff to do that, but this, to my mind, that's silly, because the data is all there. So it starts with relatively low threshold and low impact data sets. And then we're scaling, and then we're getting used to it. But then to the second question, should it be a public trust framework? It's a public-private trust framework. And basically the governments, and it's not one government, and all the participants, so all the data spaces that use iShare, influence and are on basically the board of the foundation. So we have all the participants in the council of participants, and they select who is on the supervisory board. Supervisory board appoints the executive board. So there's a great, well, and simple structure to govern this foundation and keep it open and keep it also in check with the objectives of the foundation. And since it's a foundation, but we have that, what's happening? There you go. I just let go of that one. So that's the way to structure it. And the reason it's not fully public is because there is an actual trust issue of a lot of businesses to the government. So that's why it's in between businesses and governments. And indeed, the government side is important. So that's why I've put those two under. So iShare, that's a happy bell. So iShare has been funded by the Top Sector Logistics, which is a part of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water in the Netherlands, right from the beginning. And the governments are really, well, incentivized to get this going, but also discovered this is not happening if we do that as the government, because nobody will, in the end, trust unless there's a public governance structure. And the second, well, funding part, other than the data spaces, because iShare basically gets funded from the data spaces directly, is the European Commission, and with the help of the Commission, we've built i4Trust as an acceleration program. Any other good questions like that? Or better, or worse, or discussions?
I have another curiosity.
Yeah, go.
You have thematic groups, so maybe you are divided because you was born as a logistic platform. No?
So it's not a platform, right? So it's
yes, sorry,
no.
excuse me.
Oh, sorry, it's my own.
You're born from logistics.
Yeah.
But do you have, for example, I don't know, urban mobility, other energies, because each field maybe has specific, so I understand that the data is quite common aspect, but there are technicalities related and special conditions related to this specific market. I don't know if you have something like this.
Yeah, so the line of thinking is that data spaces are combinations of organizations in a specific sector that have the same sort of data set that they want to exchange. So we have a data space, and we now call it a data space, or originally it was just a team or whatever, but and they define within that segment, this is the data set we're going to exchange. And these are the terms and conditions on top of the generic iShare terms and conditions that we want to add. And they are totally free to do that. That's the federated principle. They just use iShare as a standard to authorize, use all the components to give authorization and to register participants. So we don't, and my objective is not to build a massive foundation, because that's pointless, just adding cost. There's no point in doing that. All those data spaces have their input also on the general ledger part. So we have a set of fields available for everyone. Bless you. Allergic to long stories? No, so there's freedom. Sorry. So there's the freedom to structure it in your own data space. Also add extra fields to your own part of the ledger. But if you want to add elements to the generic distributed ledger, you go through the council of participants and add those functionalities. So that's sort of the living structure. And as well, we discussed that as well. I'm from Rotterdam, and we always say, that is hard to translate. Niet lullen maar poetsen. Nobody gets that. So the point is, don't just talk about it, get going and try it. And that's how you learn. So one of the things we've learned over the last year as well is that we have a single identifier in the iShare network at the moment, which is EORI, the European Economic Operator Identification, which is just amazing, but is not really working in the US or in China or in. So we're now in the process of adding functionality to the ledger to have multiple identification numbers, to also have a US number. And because it's the same with data spaces, an organization also works, well, in Europe, but probably also in the US or in Asia, or so you also want to be found by your US counterparts. Yeah. To enable all those elements, the trust anchor is going to be sort of the single starting point, and from that trust anchor you find, well, what data space is that guy in, and then you find the definition of that data space and find what kind of standards they're using. And so that's the line of thinking. So act local in a sense, but think global in how we set up the ledger. And I think with that, so that's why I mentioned in the beginning, we're in close collaboration with the Gaia team, with IDS team, with the other standard frameworks. And what we have is not a theory, it's just real life. So
I have a final question regarding, because you presented the second call of the, you presented the second call, already David presented. I have a question regarding the consortia, because the consortia you asked 3 SMEs and 1 digital
innovation hub, yeah.
Yeah. But why you don't include in such consortia public administration that sometimes are, and we explain and we told, sometimes are they stimulate this sharing, data sharing.
Apparently there are 2 microphones you need to talk in. You can have a totally other story in that one.
I was using your microphone.
So the point of that specification is that the funding goes to SMEs. But there's nothing limiting you to pull in public administrations, pull in massive corporations, because they can all be part of the project, but it's how they call it in Europe, it's an instrument built for SMEs, because it's trying to, well, solve market failure in a sense.
Right.
So that market failure is usually not happening with the big corporates, but because...
So public administration can join, but we do not fund them.
Exactly. There's no money flowing to them, but having public administrations as a data consumer, but having them as a data consumer, and usually this is really a challenge. So I would really love to trigger that line of thinking that we've shown on the climate agreement, because this same situation is in every single country. And with that, you build an open ecosystem and framework, a data space for new energy applications that we all dreamt about. Okay, I have a background in smart metering, been building on that stuff forever, but only now you can start giving access to data in a smart way. Instead of being worried, hey, you guys are going to hack my meter and I'm going to drill holes in, etc. Yeah. Did I lose all of you?